Alright, I'm happy with the action of that component now. This component I was telling you was selecting the frames. Of course it wasn't selecting the frames. This is the parallax adjustment, which shifts the whole mask system upwards or downwards in the finder depending on the position of the rangefinder arm, so that it compensates for it compensates the view you see in the finder relative to how close the object is in front of you. Effectively, it means it moves the frame downwards when you are focused on a close object, the frame that you see in the finder. But that's nice and smooth, that's good. So I can pop the other component in place. Which is this one. And this couples to the arm on the rangefinder. That screw started. Check that it's correctly centered up. It is. Up that screw up. That's good. The other arm here, this one, this arm here, which swings backwards and forwards, that selects the frame that you see in the finder. It's worth noting here that there's a little return spring on the top here, on the top of that finder assembly, which operates to keep it pushed downwards, to return it to the downwards position. Well, so far so good. That's our rangefinder mostly reassembled. I'll pop that to one side. I need to clean the glass on the rangefinder arm, that front component. So as usual, I clean the front surface first, the outer surface first, because it's the easiest to get to. And once that's clean, you're better able to judge your success at cleaning the inner surface, which is not so easy to get to. Now I'm looking for any leftover haze or dust. That all looks good. I'll take a bit of molybdenum paste, run it around the inside edge of the arm. Take my brass or bronze bush, pop that into place, and I'll align the notch in that arm with the alignment mark I'd placed on that arm previously. I'm going to put a very light smear of molybdenum on the arm, very light. I'm going to pop this into place on the rangefinder. I'll put a smear of molybdenum on the return spring. That has to run through, there's a tiny gap. There's a tiny gap in the arm here. That spring runs through there. So holding all this in place, Oh, I'm just looking down. Where's my wavy washer gone? Hang on. The search for stray parts has started. It almost certainly has picked up as I have swung a magnetised screwdriver over it and then been flung off into the darkness. Back when I find that wavy washer. Alright, crisis averted. The washer had indeed, that wavy washer had escaped. It was on the floor near the table and was discovered by using a large magnet and running it across the floor. So I'm just lining up the arm with the hole in the body and drop my wavy washer in place over the bush. Put my screw in place. Run that down with the tweezers. Check that that does indeed move freely. I'm looking from the side to make sure that the wavy washer is sitting in position and hasn't been pushed off to one side, binding things up. That all appears good. I'll nip that screw up tight. This arm will couple with the pin on the rangefinder arm, so that as the arm moves in and out, it swings this arm backwards and forwards, moving the frame lines, it's the parallax correction we're seeing there. It's moving that up and down. So the rangefinder now is clean. That's ready to go back on the camera. No more work's required there. So the next component to deal with really is the shutter assembly. So I'll bring that in. Alright, so we have the shutter assembly here. The flash sink couples here. There's a little plastic connector with a screw, and that screw serves to clamp the wire to the tab coming out of the back of the shutter, the flash sink. So I'm just going to get a small screwdriver and loosen off that screw if I can get to it. It's awkward to get to. I've moved it about half a turn, hopefully that's enough. There are 4 screws that hold our shutter assembly to this front component, the front of the body. These 4 holes, one here, one here, one here, and the last one is visible here. So they're awkward to get at, but we need to get at them. So I'll find an appropriate screwdriver. One. You can't really see the screw head, so you have to feel your way forward. Oh, this screw head I can just about see. to get your screwdriver in position. With luck, the shutter will come loose now. It does. Here we have it. There it was our connector, terminal block almost, for our flash sync. And pop that to one side. Here we have the shutter assembly, and here we have basically the front of the camera body. Our 4 screws that held the shutter to it, and these screws here, 3 screws, they're prone to coming loose. They were loose in the case of this camera. I tightened them earlier once I had this front off. It's worth tightening those and even putting a drop of lacquer on them to stop them coming loose. If you're applying any lacquer to stop them coming loose, be particularly careful with this screw. You don't want any lacquer to run down under this arm and stop it from pivoting freely. That's your shutter release. So be exceedingly sparing with any lacquer you put anywhere near that screw head. The front of the body here, the chrome trim is held in place with 3 screws. I'm going to disassemble this part of the camera just for the sake of completeness, if you like. It's by no means essential in most cases. So I can remove the chrome shroud. I've got a stray screw here. That must have been loose under there. That's interesting, and it's something I'll have to find out where that came from, whether it's one that I've dropped in as I've disassembled the camera, or whether it's fallen in. If I've got a spare screw once the camera's all back together, we'll know that this one's been floating loose in there for a long time. Right, well, these 3 screws that I just tightened up, I'm going to remove them completely now so that I can clean these components up. It's certainly the same size screw as those 3. Were there supposed to be 4 screws? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, one of the screws had fallen out of the front and then become lodged under there. So I can remove that piece now, move that aluminium piece. That explains our screw. So here I want to clean these front surfaces here and here, which is where the leatherette binds back to. The rest of the surface needs to be cleaned of any oils or grease. It's got a bit of a sheen to it, but those are fingerprints right from original assembly almost certainly. And here we have our meter coupling wheel, and that's a little bit stiff. So I'm going to clean that with solvent and then lubricate it with a little touch of oil afterwards. This was our shutter release. That needs to be nice and free running. And here is the cocking action. So our cocking shaft from the cocking rack comes through and couples here. This piece, this little gear here, this pinion, couples to the back of the shutter and cocks the shutter. You're right. So far so good. Right, so I want to clean this plate first, I think. I'll find my cleaning stuff. There's not much trace of adhesive on these components. I'm just using a bit of acetone here to see if that'll remove it. I can't say it's making a great deal of headway on it. Do the same on the other side here. There's more leatherette glued on this side. That's really not shifting anything. I'll try some of this, which is CRC Electroclean. We'll see if that makes any impression on it. Again, not an awful lot. I'm just gently scraping this with the scalpel blade to remove that deposit, and the deposit is very dry and dusty. That's fine. I'll do the same over here. That's fine. I'll use some naphtha on a cotton bud, and I'll just wipe all of that surface to remove any contaminants, oils, grease, dust and dirt, and the same on the interior surface. This certainly has more of an oily sheen to it, but I don't think it means that there's any substantial amount of oil on there. I just need to make sure that I do clean away any unwanted oils. That's fine. Now, the setting wheel at the bottom, I'm just going to put a drop of solvent on there and rotate that, so that if there's any problem with dried lubricants between the wheel and this big central boss here, which it is pivoted on, that should wash away. I can't say that's made a great deal of difference to the feel of that. Might be marginally smoother. I'll do the same to this wheel below it. These wheels are riveted on, so they can't be removed to clean them. Got to be cleaned in place. And that hasn't changed much in the way it feels either. It's smooth, but it's probably not as free running as I might have hoped for. So what I'm looking for here is the mesh of the gears to see if there is any contaminants on the teeth of the gears. There I'd be looking for a build-up of grease and dust that had packed into the roots of the teeth and were effectively loading up those two gears, pushing them away from each other. There's nothing really there to be noticed either. I'll use a toothpick and run it in the teeth of this little pinion here. Not much is coming away, if anything. The surface of that pinion doesn't feel exactly smooth. There may be some surface corrosion there. And the wheel that it runs against here, I'll just do the same. I'll run that toothpick through between the teeth to clear out any contaminants that may have become lodged in the root of the teeth. And just as before, there's not really an awful lot happening there. Put a drop of solvent in there, I think. The action is smooth, but it feels like the gears are preloaded, that they're under some tension. I'm looking to see if there's any distortion here, to see if the shaft looks like it's bent in any fashion. If it was bent, that would have happened if the camera had struck the ground, if the setting wheel had struck the ground, it would have pushed it inwards, which would have pushed it into firmer contact with the gear above it, effectively preloading that gear. There doesn't seem to be any noticeable effect of that there. I'm certainly not seeing anything leaning in. I just used that CRC Electra Clean there. It's a more enthusiastic solvent. See if it made any difference. It doesn't appear to have made any difference. That feels much the same now as it did when I started. That's alright. I'm checking this gear set at the top here, making sure that revolves smoothly. No hint of problems there at all. The setting wheel here, I'm going to apply a little drop of oil to that. And a drop is all it will require. It feels smooth. It's just not loose. I can feel that there is backlash in the teeth of the gears. You can feel it as you roll it slightly backwards and forwards. So it's not that that's not the problem. It's one or other of these is just too snug on its shaft, I'd say. But it does revolve smoothly, which is what's wanted. I'll put a drop of oil on the lower pinion, see if that makes a difference. Why I'm particularly sensitive to stiffness here, I suppose, is that when the camera came, the setting wheel would hardly move at all, which turned out to be mostly due to the front control rings, and once they were cleaned, it worked smoothly. But I'm used to seeing them work a little bit smoother than this. Nothing to be seen there. That's good in its way. Right. The aluminium mount here. There's not much to that, so all that needs to be done with this is just be cleaned to remove any dust and dirt. Pop back in place. And when we put the screws back in, want to make sure that they stay where they're put. Four screws. Now that we have four instead of the three that had been there originally. These screws come loose on the Retina IIIS, or found to be loose, fairly frequently. It's nothing to be shocked and horrified about. The cameras are quite old, about 60 years old, and that hardly indicates a problem with a machine if it needs a little bit of service after 60 years. I need to lacquer those four screws in place. Here I will use coloured lacquer, nail varnish. You may notice I didn't cover the entire head of this screw here, so I need to make sure that lacquer stays away from the arm. The others, you can see the lacquer quite clearly. It's useful if you're lacquering screws in place to stop them moving, to use something that's obvious if it's on the inside of the camera, so that a serviceman coming to the camera in later years can see that that's the case, that's been lacquered in place, and will use a drop of acetone or something to soften it before trying to undo the screw. If you were to use clear, that may not have been obvious, and it means that a serviceman coming in later would struggle to get that screw loose if he didn't realise that it had been lacquered in place.